Hello, everyone. Welcome to today's webinar, New Approaches to Classification and Retention for Organizational Intelligence. I'm Teresa Resick, Vice President of Market Intelligence here at AIIM, and AIIM is your host and producer of today's event. And joining me are AIIM President Peggy Winton and Chris McNulty of Microsoft. Microsoft is the underwriter of today's webinar, and we thank them very much for their support. And thank you all for taking the time to join us today. The AIIM 20 conference is just over 4 weeks away, and the early bird pricing will end this Friday. And I'm sure you see the links on your console to learn more about the event. But I just want to share with you what Elise Dunham has to say.
So some of the most valuable aspects of the conference for me have been the opportunities that I've had to really just sit down with people one-on-one or maybe in a small group and hear about their challenges that they're experiencing and sharing the ones that I have. And what I really love is just the commonalities that we're able to find with one another. And it kind of gives me this sense of inspiration and motivation to take what I'm learning back to my organization and make good changes. And it's also giving me resources and friendships, really, that I can tap into when I go home as well. So.
Really appreciate Elise for sharing her insights with us about her time at AIIM conferences. And now for the webinar fun stuff. By joining our event live, you can resize the windows in front of you. And please open group chat. That way you can message with each other and also with us here at AIIM. And group chat is in that list of icons across the bottom of your screen. I encourage you to download the resources we have available for you. That's off to the right of the slide area. Lots of really cool links in there. When you click on those, it'll open in a new browser tab, and you'll be able to check that out after the event. Do encourage you to ask questions of the speakers throughout our time today and use the Q&A feature, and we'll do our very best to get to as many of your questions later in our webcast. We'd also appreciate it if you would take the survey and let us know how we did today and give us your feedback. That link is also in the icons across the bottom, and it will open at the very end of our webinar. And this webinar is being recorded, and it will be posted to AIIM.org's Resources Webinars page in just a few days. Now to introduce the speakers we have with us today. Peggy Winton is our President and CEO of AIIM, and with over 30 years of program, product, and business development experience, Peggy is responsible for the strategic, technical, and business direction of AIIM. Peggy believes that marketing and technology are converging and moving to the forefront of the business in order to deliver the ultimate customer experience. And with this, businesses need to adapt to a world that has shifted from physical to data, technology, and automation. And also joining us in just a short bit will be Chris McNulty, and he's the Senior Product Manager at Microsoft. And so right now, I do want to turn things over to Peggy Winton to kick off our talk today. Peggy?
Teresa, thank you so much, and let me add my thanks to all of you that have tuned in with us today. We can't really have a conversation about organizational intelligence without recognizing that we're all feeling the impact of the volume, the velocity, and the variety of information that most of us need to manage and store and protect. It now exceeds our ability to even marginally keep pace with it. I know you're feeling that, and we talk about this a lot. We put some context around this aspect just last year when we came out to all of you and we asked you, look at your own organizations and think about all the volume of information that's coming in and swirling around. By how much do you expect that volume to grow over the next 2 years? And the answer you gave us is average 4.2 times what you're already feeling right now. And adding to that, you expect that 60% of this information is going to be unstructured, like in a contract or a conversation, or semi-structured like an invoice or a form. So we're feeling those effects, and we really need to do something about it. So, the overflowing and the incompatible nature of that information is having a real impact on finding what we need when we need it. Think about it. So whether it's trying to find what an employee needs when you're onboarding that person to a new role, or ensuring that another employee's work artifacts are captured for future use, retaining and maintaining and accessing all of this knowledge can be a real key strategic differentiator. So think about that. Take a second and think about the possibilities. If you could only find the information you need in order to do your job all the time. And your colleagues, the same. Think how impactful that could be. But it's clearly a challenge. It's a big challenge for most of us, mostly due to the level of effort required to find all the information because it's scattered. It's scattered and it's siloed. These siloed content repositories and disconnected process applications, they almost create an environment in which we as knowledge workers feel like human system integrators. We're copying, we're pasting information from where it's stored to where it's needed. It's not very efficient, and that's not really what we signed up for. Most of us understand the problems created by that overflowing, incompatible information silos, and we know we need to do something about it. So our job today is to help you get started, and I hope our information will be very helpful in that regard. So what's the main reason why we're undertaking this kind of initiative? We asked you, again, thank you all if you've participated in our regular research exercises. We really, really appreciate that input. You said that really the main reason was to improve your organizational flexibility. Following that was improving your knowledge worker productivity. Of course, that's what we all want. But, we need a new approach to managing that. And in the title of today's presentation is a term that I really, really like, organizational intelligence. That's what Microsoft is using. And Chris McNulty and I are going to identify what we think are the important capabilities that are needed to ensure that knowledge finds the people in whatever application they're using versus asking the people to find the knowledge. Wow, I really, really love that concept, don't you? So let's get started, Chris. And before we do, I need to ask you, are we talking about knowledge management, that term that was introduced in the 90s and kind of confused everyone? I've always thought that we needed a better name for it. And you guys have coined the phrase organizational intelligence. Tell me what you think that means to you and your customers. And when we're talking about documents and content, to achieve that, what qualifies? What kind of content and documents?
Yeah, it's a great question. When we think about knowledge management, as it arose 20 plus years ago, I think the word management is really shifting the focus away from what you're supposed to be doing with knowledge in the first place. Knowledge management arose from very real needs for organizations to be able to tap into the information that they had and were generating through the course of everyday activities. But to just manage it in place, coming up with different systems, coming up with essentially knowledge warehousing, in hindsight, really fell short of what's really needed, which is knowledge capture and delivery, which is organizational intelligence is about taking all that information and being able to harness it in a way that improves everyone's collective productivity. One customer that we've been working on with throughout this journey is Mott MacDonald. Mott MacDonald is a global engineering firm, and one of their core values is what they call connected thinking. They see our technologies as being instrumental at forging what they call knowledge networks, and it's really people-centric instead of data-centric. How do you connect people to knowledge and knowledge to people? And when you go around Mott MacDonald's offices, they actually have signs all over the place that say, connected thinkers work here. And it's really about tapping into information that's in people's heads sometimes expressed in their work patterns and content, and making it accessible at the point of need so that they find the knowledge automatically without having to go hunt for it in the first place.
I love that. That's another good one, connected thinking. And I guess what we'll focus on over the next few minutes is how seamless can we make that? Because I think everybody gets the idea of a sort of library of resources, and that works a lot when you're talking about scientific foundations or medical societies and things like that. But connected thinking in a way that's pretty seamless and on demand, if you will. So that's a great intro, and we've got a wonderful story using Mott MacDonald and others as examples. This is a global engineering consulting firm, and certainly that's extremely important for them to have mind share when it comes to being innovative and creating new programs and services. So the capabilities that Mott MacDonald really exemplifies, and what Chris and I want to try to eke out and draw out over the next few minutes are three things. Content integration for as much of a single view of needed information as possible, including those from remote sources. And isn't that an important criteria right now? Mm-hmm. You know, it's not all in one tidy little place. And content classification, both digital and paper documents using tagging and metadata with some help from machine learning. And then finally, process analysis to identify and eliminate those information bottlenecks.
Yeah,
so let's take a look. Go ahead, Chris.
So I think it's important to understand, Mott MacDonald is a global engineering firm. They have needed information all over the place. And part of how, they have 16,000 employees worldwide. And they have investments and outreach to universities and think tanks that are generating the next generation of how to build things. If you've ever been in an airport or on a train or on a bridge, odds are pretty good that you have walked through one of Mott MacDonald's projects. So how do they tap into that external information, the things that people are storing in the ordinary course of activity, and making sure that it is just there and addressable? They have information that sprawls throughout a Microsoft information estate, as well as other repositories that they've been using historically for engineering documents and the like. And so that integration piece, it's important to understand it works at two levels, both being able to assemble a unified index behind the scenes, and then from a user experience, making sure that you're flowing all that information to one place where I can get to it. And it's important to understand that in doing that, it's not important to just throw, when you're integrating remote sources, you need some AI in the mix to help you make sense of all of that, to help you add classification, and then make sure that you're measuring the ways that people are working with their documents and content to make sure that the business goals are being met and identify opportunities for improvement with bottlenecks. I think that's a cyclical process. Those are ongoing parts of the journey for them.
So let's take a look at each of these in a little bit more detail and one at a time. You mentioned the kind of workers that are at Mott MacDonald, and certainly they're engineers, but they're not all techies. And I think what's so important is integrating content capabilities into line of business applications. After all, you've got people who are doing documentation, you got people who are doing design, you got sales and marketing people. Those line of business applications need to ensure that the content they're looking for is available, but it's also generating value in context. And I love that concept as well. Chris, we asked our community about what capabilities are most in demand to achieve that, and the organizational intelligence. Integrating content into core business processes was at the top of the list, clearly. Tell me a little bit more about Mott MacDonald when it comes to some of those line of business applications. I mentioned a few. Are there others that are obvious that I've neglected to call out?
Oh, I mean, they have lots. They've got supply chain tools, SAP, AutoCAD, the things that you would expect in a contemporary engineering organization, and making sure that both the applications and the content that comes out of those applications is something that they can bring into core business process. And they see, and part of the reason why Microsoft loves them is they see Microsoft 365 as being that single pane of glass where people are going to be spending an awful lot of their time. So how do we make sure that those processes and that information is addressable to them? And I also want to say, with all the love that I have for AIM and the AIM tribe, I love seeing, listed here in third place is records management. One of the things that we've also heard an awful lot about is the more that we've moved into these cloud-based dynamic content systems where you have capabilities like co-authoring and lots of versions going on, a lot of the personalization that goes along with it is based on things that are generating the most heat, the most activity, and sometimes drafts and things look busier. And when you finish a process and you get to that final state, that record, that may not have the kind of document churn that you expect, but understanding that, for folks who are coming from a records management audience, that record flag is one of the biggest indicators that this is a more important version of this document than any that come before. So, the kind of resurgence of the importance of retention and records management is really important to understanding how to make sure that information is not just warehoused and archived, but carried forward to continue delivering value in the months and years beyond.
Thank you. That's a good point. And when we look at just the challenges of content integration, it's not easy for most organizations. And I think a somewhat almost counterpoint to what you just said, Chris, is that many of us in this world, in this industry, had a pipe dream that all of our content would be in one central repository, and there would be only one system. And obviously, that's not realistic, because 54% of the information needed within a particular business application now is typically stored within the application itself, rather than within a dedicated content repository. So again, we're talking about the importance of surfacing that content where workers are playing, where they live. And 75% of our audience said that's really a struggle, and they're finding that a challenge.
I love seeing this. It really squares well with some of the work and research that we've been doing over the past couple of years. When we, hang on, let's see. There we go. As we've been on this journey about how do we help organizations do more with their information to be more intelligent, get more out of their content and turn it into knowledge, we revisited many of the same needs we've been hearing for a long time. The needs about making sure that information is protected and making sure that it's integrated. But throughout the course of that journey, it really uncovered those knowledge needs that, in addition to what traditionally we would have called ECM or content services or intelligent information management, how do we improve search so people can find the right information? Some of the statistics we've seen is in the U.S. alone, nearly $750 billion a year is lost in productivity from individuals searching for content that already exists and they just can't find. And nearly as much is spent recreating content because they can't find it. But those knowledge pillars that are out there, as I've met with focus groups over the past year, it scores higher and higher and higher. How do we make sure that we are capturing and tapping into the information that people already have out there in their heads, in their work practices, and in their content? And how do we make sure that once we've captured it, that we're maintaining it at a high quality, that it is not leaving the building at the end of every day, or as workforces continue to shift, whether it's millennial turnover or people retiring out of the workforce, making sure that that best knowledge is always there and accessible to the organization. And that is top of mind increasingly as organizations are looking to do more with the talent they already have.
So looking for business critical information obviously improves productivity, and a lot of the points you just made illustrate that. But they can also provide a hugely rich user experience, both internal and external. And, we've cited at AIIM that that's the number one driver for digital transformation. Can you add to some of your comments, Chris? Give a few examples of how Mott MacDonald really made their content applications more customer experience friendly because of these capabilities.
Well, one of the most important things is to not disrupt the ordinary course. So we talked earlier about making sure you're integrating information into that unified index. And there was an earlier slide we're talking about, what are your goals with a content integration platform? No one wants to integrate content just because it makes more sense. It's to solve a business challenge. Just moving content around for its own sake is a waste of most people's resources. Their big driver, as I mentioned before, is how do we deliver knowledge into the applications where people are already spending time inside of tools like email or websites or chat environments. And by being able to bring all that information directly to those applications, rather than asking someone to swivel over into a different application to go find something, they're able to greatly accelerate the productivity. Based on which survey you tap into, on average, they say if you get interrupted and are forced to move to a different application when you're in the midst of a task, between 23 and 26 minutes before you get back fully up to speed on what you were doing in the first place. So using the common applications, Outlook, Teams, and the rest, to deliver that information is essential to making sure people aren't being disrupted and being taken off task.
Yep. Avoid the swivel chair situation for sure.
Right.
So I'll advance this.
Sure.
So the extension of content services to the cloud becomes the next logical step for ensuring that content is consistently available, accessible, and shareable. And there's growing confidence in cloud applications. We've all seen it. AIIM research years ago said it's not a question of if, but when. But a shift is emerging sort of beyond recognizing that the cloud is not just about storage or cost savings or mobile access and even flexibility, but deploying content services in the cloud actually gives us all a unique opportunity to rethink how our business processes can evolve to be cloud-enabled. And, what is the potential to really enhance that personal productivity, overall organizational efficiency, but do it with some sort of governance and control. So, yep. Chris, what do you see as the main factors holding people back? Given how far we've come, we know how much of the everyday services we take for granted are cloud-based. So what is it? Is it a perceived security, loss of control of processes, or dependability? What are your customers telling you?
We definitely hear a lot about regulatory concerns with the cloud, especially when you're looking at a global environment. All the issues around data sovereignty and can I move data from this country to that? I think there sometimes there's a lack of insight among some of the regulatory bodies that's always going to lag, and those issues. I think the regulatory issues are notable. The security issues are something that, it still comes up from time to time, but in the same way that I think we all recognize that an army provides much broader security than a single security guard, that a cloud-based platform, and regardless of whether you're talking, to Microsoft or Google or Box or Amazon or OpenText or what have you, the scale that you have in a cloud platform we're all able to deploy much better security that's out there. I also think that the other thing that holds people back that is the successes that people had with doing integration on what I will call legacy platforms, say 10 years ago. Because if I have taken a content repository, whether it's SharePoint or one of the other tools that's out there, and I've started to bring line of business systems in and around that to supplement it, add process, add data, then migrating it is no longer as simple as just moving the files from one container to another. I also need to transform the processes and data that go around with it. So migration is hard. And the more that we rely on our content, migration can continue to get hard. One of the resources that we have out there is available online, service we have called Fast Track, which is there to provide guidance, tools, and execution to help you move content if you need to move content. Mostly focused, obviously, for us, moving things into the Microsoft 365 platform. But the things that you need to be mindful of about how do you catalog and map what you have, determine what needs to move. We were talking before about ROT, redundant, obsolete, and trivial content. Like, those are things that you want to weed out because they carry a cost, they add complexity to migration, and in most cases, they don't add any value to what you're doing. And so the kinds of tools that are available, there are a number of tools that we make available free of charge and services that we make available free of charge, as well as a broad ecosystem of partners who can help with software and services to transform what organizations had been doing to what they need to be doing.
So before we talk about ways to combat rot, let me ask you another question about cloud. A lot of people throw out cloud first as a strategy or a priority. Can you offer some guidelines on, when is cloud first not appropriate for an organization? You talked about legacy, you talked about applications. It may not be the perfect, a mix and integration. Is there any hard and fast rule for organizations in just determining what is really conducive to the cloud and what isn't?
There are still particular applications, particular regions where cloud can be challenging. Our CEO, Satya Nadella, talks about intelligent cloud and intelligent edge. And there are a number of services that really need to run on that edge, some high performance computing, and especially when you are moving away from the bandwidth privileged coastal enclaves of the United States, where we think nothing about streaming the latest high def movie to our phones while we're at the gym. But there's large swaths of the world that just don't have good wireless bandwidth or any wireless bandwidth at all. And so relying on cloud when that final mile of connectivity isn't there, it really involves a rethink. And I'm thinking in particular of some of the sub-Saharan relief agencies that we work with, where they need to make sure that data is kept locally so that people can access it. There are also some places where in technical realms and financial realms where decisions need to be made in fractions of a second. And those kinds of things, there may be data that is sourced from the cloud, but the actual data that's required for a technical decision needs to be kept locally for those kind of precision activities. Because we may think nothing of a 3-second wait to load a Word document that's coming from the cloud. And it may be coming from a server farm on the other side of the world. But if what I'm trying to do is determine the exact right time to take a medical step or ensure that a financial trade is going through at the optimal moment, 3 seconds is too long. But those are the outliers. Yeah. I mean, we'll be fair. For the vast swath of modern organizations, the cloud is going to solve 90% of those challenges.
Well, thanks. I mean, it's a question we get all the time. So you talked about knowing what you have, getting rid of what you don't is a huge place and way to get started. And, ultimately that manual ingestion of incoming information means there's going to be a lot of poor or missing metadata. And that makes it difficult to fully embrace the next generation of AI and machine learning technologies. And when we ask folks, about a sort of shift in focus, 68% say that it's really shifted in their organization from something that's done after the fact, often for archiving purposes, to something that's done much closer to the point of information creation as part of a business process. But on average, only 39% of incoming information is processed automatically. So if we do the math, that's 60% that's still processed manually. Pretty challenging there. Could you comment on Mott McDonald and where they are on that scale? Do you have any idea?
So I'll talk about a different customer that where they are today, and part of why they're turning to some of our solutions is they're they're off to the left. This is a major North American retailer. They generate 80,000 purchasing contracts a week. They have a strict, although not complex, compliance regime for those contracts. The contracts, basically above $10,000, have to be stored encrypted, and between 5,000 and 10, they need to be retained, and below they don't care about. But they have these automatic systems that generate all of these contracts, and then they have to bring those contracts to a group of several dozen people who have to read those contracts just looking for the value manually. They take something that's generated automatically, and they have a manual dependency on that process, and then they have to carry that forward. So that's one of the places where we're starting to bring some technologies to help close that gap for them.
And it is a gap. There's a big pull in organizations to take basic information capture capabilities and extend them as part of a broader transformation strategy. I think 70% of the organizations we tapped see the link between AI and their future success. So speaking specifically about artificial intelligence, and I can't remember if you have a great example where Mott McDonald is concerned, or you wanted to, again, talk about some other customers, but certainly Project Cortex leverages some of that. So how are they or other organizations using AI to accomplish some of that? Was any particular type of content the key beneficiary of AI?
So I'm going to answer that, but I need to just spend a few seconds walking through kind of the technologies that we're building, which we've announced last year as part of Project Cortex, because AI and ethical AI is kind of at the heart of what we see as the next generation of content services. So Project Cortex, I'll make it very simple, is orchestrated around these three promises. The first is about building out scale. So how can we build repositories that move beyond thousands to millions and approaching billions of pieces of content in a unified repository, and take advantage of our search-based connector technologies to be able to federate out remote content, to be able to bring it in without moving it. So you can start to work with it, not have to migrate it, but start to get the benefits of Microsoft 365 there. Secondly, if you're going to bring 1 billion new pieces of content into your cloud, no one has time to read and process all that information. So how do we use AI, and in particular, what I would describe as machine teaching rather than machine learning, to let business users, without writing code, supply the rules to help recognize what kind of content this is. This looks like a contract. These are the dates. These are the people. These are the locations, the facts, the figures, and summaries, to add those as tags to the document. And then be able to use AI further to organize that by the relationships amongst those to organize information into topics, which we then deliver throughout Microsoft 365 as what may look to someone like an automatically AI-written Wikipedia. But we balance what the machines do with that to the need to be able to recognize experts to step in, curate, and improve the quality of what the AI has out there. So that's the way that we think about it. And one of the organizations I'm going to speak to is an Australian energy company. They have lots of information moving in and out of the organization. And as an organization, especially, the information comes back in. They're using AI to help recognize this is a design document. More importantly, this is a design document about Project 1234, Project Athena. Call it what you will. They have different rules that say when new information comes from outside in, how do we make sure that it's approved and appropriately distributed? And using AI to recognize that what signals that it might relate to Project Athena could be handwriting or an image that's included in the document. And rather than have to use manually intensive ways of classifying all that information, we can use AI to triage 90% of it and just ask people to step in and deal with the exceptions. So that's kind of how we see one of the examples of how we see Project Cortex being able to help make sense of this vast sea of rising content and turning it into focused knowledge that people can use for their processes.
So we've been talking a lot about the ingestion and the automated classification to know what you have and really extract the value of it. You mentioned rot, and that's the flip side. Getting rid of what is redundant, obsolete, and trivial, and doing it safely and seamlessly and confidently. And I don't know about your customers, but our community members hate doing any of that manually. I mean, who wants to? So a big change we've seen over the past 5 years is the adoption of the tools to automate that process. And it's actually jumped to 73% of folks who agree that automated classification is the only way to keep up with those volumes and to really have that confidence to push the delete button, as we say. I think we've got a few of our conference sessions on that. It's okay to push delete. And even better, you don't have to be the one pushing it. So, yeah. And, what are some of the key process targets for auto classification of this type? Certainly, and you talked about the records management implication of things in a different context earlier, Chris, but to be able to automatically declare content at the point of ingestion to say, yes, this does need special handling, it does have records characteristics. 48% of you said to declare content as part of a workflow or process. Yeah, by all means, leverage that as soon as you can. And if you don't need it, then don't send it through the workflow. And then, again, on records declaration, the prompts. So taking the human guesswork out of that. So back to Mott McDonald and that element of it in terms of classification, whether to responsibly dispose of or ingest. What are some things that they've done? What were some of the key process targets that they had, Chris?
So I think it's helpful to think about the ways that we see AI helping because, as we mentioned before, they have lots of content coming from lots of applications, so it's coming in lots of formats. And this gets back to everyone's favorite old bugaboo, metadata. How do we use AI to improve the frequency and accuracy of the metadata that we have about content? And, on the left, manual is something that's always been out there. But, I did a presentation at a conference 10 years ago where I talked about the cost of the red asterisk, marking a field as required, because you're forcing people to do something, to fill out a form to be able to transact a file save. So manual is always going to be there, but we know that it is a low likelihood of success. So the ways that we see AI helping improve processes, and some of these are the implicit processes that we all do just to read and make sense of information. So some is based on digital assets, so making sure that we have tools that can look at audio, video, picture files, and recognize the kinds of objects that are in there, turn handwriting into text, being able to convert images into text, and being able to pull all that information out. The second is around structured documents, and the third is around unstructured documents. And both are closely aligned in that the idea is, how do we use those recognition capabilities when I see a standard document, a job site report, which may be filled out manually on a piece of paper, that gets into the system, and it may get into the system as a picture, but being able to turn that picture into something where I can say it relates to this project, and this project has these 5 reviewers, and these people need to be notified that it's come in, and at least one needs to approve this before the request on this job report can be brought forward. There's lots of small processes that benefit from this. So it isn't a matter of finding, there is one master unifying process that every one of 16,000 people does the same way, but understanding we have tools that within this project, something that's going to make these 24 people more efficient, or that project, and empowering people to supply the rules as well as supply the process to be able to define it in terms that make sense to them has really been key for unlocking the success that they've had so far.
Yeah, easily understood. So, we talk about intelligent information management at AIIM as a three-legged stool: content services, process services, and analytics services. And traditional content management capabilities are. Yep. Yes. We okay? Traditional content management capabilities have really increasingly become commoditized, and they're shifting from a source of competitive advantage to almost table stakes in a much larger value proposition that's centered around the process and the machine learning side. And we see a major pivot underway over the next 2 years from content as a standalone priority. That's really a throwback, kind of a legacy of the ECM years, and content as a key enabler of processes and analytics. And you've given us some great examples of Mott MacDonald and what specific targets they've got. We have to talk about all of this by remembering that the amount of information coming into our organizations is exploding, and most of that is in unstructured or semi-structured form. So turning it into machine comprehensible data is just one way to really leverage that content at the required size and the speed. So, Chris, if we're looking for the ability to bring human and machine-generated content into more of a professionally managed environment, what does it really mean to do it at scale? How do organizations avoid simply adding to that rot that already exists and really focus instead on those real, I guess I call them value nuggets?
Well, frankly, I think a lot of the responsibility there falls back to the service providers, like the Microsofts, Amazons, Googles, et cetera, of the world, at providing tools that can use other signals. If you think about this, one of the things that developers will use to describe this is graph-based technologies. And it's something we have at Microsoft, and other companies have this as well. But understanding that the ways that we interact with information, the implicit ways that, if you and I are sharing a file and other people at AIIM are also working on the same file, there are signals that can be gleaned from who talks about this, where do they talk about it, how do they talk about it? Is it in a meeting? Is it in a chat? Is it on a phone call? Is it through email? All of those things implicitly add value, add signals that tell us which things are being used most often, which things are being used least often. 10, 20 years ago, we could have used much simpler tools and techniques to say, well, I'm going to get rid of any files that haven't been looked at in a year. And that's, that is fine, but that's one way of approaching it. But we as a service provider can provide far more intelligence to let you determine, what's going to make the most sense for me personally, and then implicitly being able to invert those decisions to say, this is content that sits in your organization that is unmanaged and unseen. One of the capabilities, for instance, that we have does just that. It uses AI in our compliance engine to say, you've defined policies to manage content. It's only been attached to 11% of the information in your organization. Would you like to analyze the other 89%? And again, there's never a big bang approach, but you eventually get to a point where you realize there is a lot of dark matter in the universe, and some of this is going to always stay dark. And understanding not just that information may be tagged in a way that says that it's obsolete, but you can verify that it's not generating meaningful information to you ever again. And then you can make a decision around, archiving or purging those things. As you said before, don't be afraid of the delete key.
That's right. That's right. Well, what I've got on the screen now is really the top drivers for undertaking a process automation project. That's our last sort of section and our last capability in this whole organizational intelligence discussion. And, these drivers have always been important when you talk about efficiency and reduced costs. But the customer level experience is something that I'm not sure that our community talks enough about. A failure to address those can have almost put a customer experience veneer on things that can prove pretty frustrating to the customers themselves once they penetrate that veneer and encounter some ugly and manual back office processes. You talk about creating bottlenecks in the experience. So did Mott MacDonald perform any sort of analysis to identify the bottlenecks in the first place? And when they did, what tools did they use?
So the analysis that they did, and it was mostly focused on looking at, some of it was financial, and looking at the best practices and the best performing teams in their organization. One of the ratios that they look at as a professional services firm is billability to chargeability ratio. So how much time am I spending on a project versus when do I get to the point at which my time is considered valuable enough to be billable back to the client? One of the things that they realized is the process for getting questions answered that the best performing teams used was to take a very open approach, being able to construct open communities of practice around all the different areas that project touches. So if you are, building a bridge that's crossing a railroad, even if you may be on the bridges team, giving you easy access to tap into the content and knowledge about railway construction improves the likelihood that you're going to be a more effective resource on that bridge project. And so they used some Microsoft tools. They used a lot of the, what I would describe as conventional tools, including BogSat. Are you familiar with BogSat?
No.
BogSat stands for Bunch of Guys Sit Around Talking. It's one of my favorite acronyms. There is still sometimes no substitute for sitting down and observing and listening within the organization. And they continue to do a lot of that. And that's been instructive for us as we're taking our content services platform to more and more customers.
Thank you for that. I think we are just about out of time, Teresa. Bring us on home.
Couple things, as we are readying our next generation solutions, that we get asked by customers, what can I do to get ready for this? And I'll boil it down to 4 things. First, if although we're going to make as much value in Microsoft 365 available to content that lives outside, there are some things that are going to work best inside of Microsoft 365. So minimize the rot, but move your Prime content into Microsoft 365. And we talked about some of the migration capabilities that are out there. And for content that you can't move, but that is still priority, understand, prioritize where you have information that lives outside of the cloud. And if it can't be moved, you have a plan to add that into scope for search connectors so that you can start to get some of the cloud benefits of it, even if it's living in file shares or in on-premises repositories. The third step is, if you haven't already done this, move to modern pages and experiences. And the fourth, especially for my taxonomy lovers out there, our next generation services are heavily based on deriving knowledge from the ways that you use taxonomy and metadata to classify your content. So if you haven't been using them, it's a good time to look. If you have been using it, thank you. Thank you for keeping the faith, and continue to use taxonomy definitions out there, because it's going to pay off for you in the long run. A couple of things I just wanted to share about what we're doing, especially around Project Cortex, which is going to be coming out later this year. We've made a lot of information available on our website at aka.ms Project Cortex. And you can also apply to join the private preview. We have details on that available in the link here on the screen, Project Cortex/preview blog. But probably the best way to learn from us, from me, from my colleagues, and from the AIIM tribe is come to the AIIM conference. We've been incredibly happy to be as engaged with AIIM as we are. We're bringing a large contingent from around the world to Dallas coming in the middle of March, and we certainly hope that as many of you as possible are going to be able to join us and our fellow members of the tribe in Dallas.
Thank you, Chris. I appreciate that, and we're all looking forward to it. It's going to be so exciting. Before I talk a little bit more about the conference, where some of these really heady conversations take place, I'm curious about your personal advice for people when you mentioned how to get started, and you gave some really good steps, but I think people still struggle with what we talk about when we talk about organizational intelligence. What kinds of things? We boiled it down to certain documentation and content and things like that. But, what would your advice be if someone says, gosh, I don't even know how to think about organizational intelligence in my organization? Do you have any advice for that? Because I always wonder, what would happen if your key content creators for things like program or product design, marketing collateral, or other business functions just walked out the door today? Would you be able to locate and repurpose and leverage all of that? Is there a better way for people to just start thinking about what are the assets we're even talking about?
Yes, the best way to think about this is to rotate your perspective 90 degrees. And I'm going to borrow from my good friend Sue Hanley, who's part of the information tribe that's out there, who would remind us all, and she's been helpful with me, don't take a top-down approach. Instead, think about the results and work backwards. So instead of looking at the top of your screen, look at the right side of your screen. What do you want the results to be? And the answer may be, I need people to know, what is, we've heard, one of the examples might be, I don't know the best way to process a change order on a project. And then work back, well, how will that question get answered? It helps you understand, how do I structure my information, my systems, my classification, and my processes to make sure at the moment when someone has that question that they can quickly have the answer find them rather than make them go send emails and phone calls and searches and like. So think about your end result and work backwards from there is probably the best way to conceptualize this.
Good advice. And, those of us who are leaders and impatient, we need to stop taking the top-down approach. We say the same thing when it comes to examining processes. I mean, who better than the frontline people and the process owners to know about processes rather than some of us who think we know how things are already currently being done. So I like that. That's really, really good advice. Well, we've talked about the AIIM conference, and these are the sorts of conversations that we have there. So if you haven't already committed to come, please contact us and let us get you there. We've got all sorts of creative ways to help convince your colleagues or supervisor who might be signing the check. And really, I think the overwhelming sense of camaraderie that is there and the real problem solving that goes on makes it worth your while. There are a lot of things vying for your attention and your dollars right now, and we guarantee that we will provide you with some real career-changing and business-changing advice. And with the help of folks like Microsoft and some really fun and very candid sessions that we have, it works even better if you'll be with us. So that's enough about that. Chris, I think we ought to give you the last minute or two to think about anything that we've just neglected to say. If you wanted to leave people with just one thought as they go to bed tonight, what would that be?
Okay, shameless plug coming. Brace yourselves.
Uh-oh.
One of the threads I hope you've picked up from Peggy and me today is that we are not in a single repository world, and you have information all over the place, and people are bringing tools to help you make sense of it where it is rather than force you to push everything into a unified pile. If you are trying to make sense of this, one of the many tools that's available to you out there is the Certified Information Professional Program, the CIP, available through AIIM. So being able to understand in a heterogeneous data environment, how can I take common practices around how I want to manage information intelligently and use them in different contexts? It's a vendor-neutral way to give you the frames and tools that you need to make sense of that. So that would be the point I really would want to leave the audience with.
Well, thank you. Your check's in the mail. We couldn't do it without the support of folks like Microsoft and others of our solution providers, as well as thought leaders and practitioners. So, thank you all. It's certainly easy to talk for 60 minutes on this great topic, and we appreciate your time. As always, we'll make our replay available to you. Just give us a few hours, and you'll find it up on the AIIM website. So I'm Peggy Winton for AIIM, and again, I want to thank Chris McNulty and his team at Microsoft. And if you haven't already, register for the AIIM conference, March 3rd through the 5th in Dallas. We'd really love to see you there and continue these conversations. So with that, we will say goodbye.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you. Thanks. Bye.